Hey community, welcome to our sermon podcast for wanderers, seekers, and thinkers, for deconstructing and reconstructing. This is a feed of Open Door Church, a faith community focused on God's love and grace, a progressive church built around action, community, and people. Enjoy this week's message and check back often as we're posting new content every week. We close out Romans today. It's been fun, but it's time. Our journey through Romans has hopefully been both positive and disorienting, maybe deconstructive, with new lights shed on the time and the place and the life of the Roman churches. For many of us, Romans has been used as sort of a bludgeoning force, used against us to coerce confessions and baptisms. It's been used to elicit certain behaviors. It's been used to condemn us for who we are, for who we love, even for our theology. One hope in this process, this journey through Romans, was to break down the meaning that the church has given to Romans over the centuries, to identify a deeper, more genuine approach to the letter. In some sense, we've been addressing Romans from the lens of deconstruction, one of our favorite words. Breaking down Paul's words and our traditional understandings to reveal how those words relate to one another, to the cultural context, to the social imaginary world of the Roman churches. So for a brief moment, let's talk about this word deconstruction. Our hope for this was to have Mr. Bonnie share on deconstruction. But he's been preparing to defend his dissertation in continental philosophy, which is like the birthplace of deconstruction. So we should hear from him, but that's going to come at some later point, hopefully. So there might be like one random Romans in like the spring that then Dr. Bonnie will share with us. He's not even here. I was like expecting him to be peeking up over the AV desk as I talk about him. Yeah, he's back teaching. So if I butcher this, he can't correct me. This is perfect. With all that said, deconstruction has been a buzzword in our circles and in progressive Christian circles over the last few years. And we often fail to recognize the depth of the interpretive process, thinking of deconstruction only in contrast to construction, only as a tearing down of something. And of course, you have the right to think about it and to use it however you like, but there's some value in thinking about and in using this word as it relates to philosophical thought. And rather than the destructive purpose or that of tearing down a given theology or text, we're going to do a couple of sentences on why its original usage is valuable to us still. And hopefully, Dr. Bonnie will be able to share more at a future date. One philosopher describes deconstruction as the cracking open of a nutshell and disturbing its tranquility. It's the process of breaking down the questions to the answers that we see in an ideology. But Derrida, who is sort of the father of deconstruction, was unwilling to stop at that destructive process and insisted that we continue with the creative and generative process of a new interpretive framework that grows out of the insights of breaking those things down. Breaking down the words, the text, or ideologies. And so in our journey through Romans, it wouldn't be enough simply to tear down old theologies. It wouldn't be enough to simply pick things apart and trash traditional interpretations. We need to go beyond in an effort to generate something new that accounts for the opening of those nutshells that we discover in the text. And so when we think about the word deconstruction, it has both a tearing down and a building up component. But we often hear it used simply in tearing down or destroying. There's another philosopher who you probably will recognize, but he refers to pyrotheology, which is simply the tearing down. It is the destructive process so that we have fresh playing ground. But deconstruction is the process of breaking apart, looking at the pieces, and building something new. And too often we use it simply to break down and to tear apart. And we're not prepared for the really difficult work of rebuilding. So that's my short bit on deconstruction that Bonnie can't debate because he's not here. Anyway, so hopefully we'll hear from him soon, because I think it would be really helpful to hear like where it's come from and what we can do with it. All that to say, as we have looked through Romans, we have torn down a lot. And Paul is doing this himself. This is what's great about Romans when we see it in context. Paul is both tearing down the imaginative, the cultural context of his day, and rebuilding something fresh and something new. And unfortunately, we've taken his work and we've run with it to create the same hierarchical structures that he intended to tear down. So this morning, to close us out, I want to do a quick run through everything, almost, and then talk about the broad framework of what Paul is doing throughout Romans, and then narrow that down on what is created in that process. You ready? Everything, all at once. Here we go. We have to begin this conversation with Phoebe. Phoebe is the one who paid for and the one who delivered this letter. Probably Phoebe's own personal scribe is the one that is referenced in chapter, I think it's 15, it could be, it doesn't matter. The one referenced is probably, if she hasn't paid for him to do this work, it's her personal scribe that sort of is on payroll or whatever, that is loaned to Paul to write this. And it would have taken weeks to create this letter. It would have been a back and forth conversation, probably including Phoebe, the scribe, and Paul. And it would have been a creative process that takes weeks to write this letter. We sit down and we write out a letter, not as lengthy as Romans necessarily, and we sign it and we send it off and it's there in milliseconds. This would have taken weeks, it would have taken preparation, and then on top of that, Phoebe delivering this letter would have been prepped extensively to deliver it as the voice of Paul. I don't think we're talking about, matching his tone. I think we're talking about literally understanding the depths of how he talks, why he goes from one place to the next. She would have had the authority of Paul's voice when she traveled across the world to deliver this letter. And when she got there, she would have had the authority to answer questions. She would have practiced with him how inflections and what to emphasize and where to pause to allow for emphasis. All of that would have been a part of the process so that she could perform as Paul the letter to the Roman churches. and she would have been able to speak on his behalf when they followed up with questions. The story begins with the letter deliverer, because he's placed this authority in someone outside the appropriate social structure, outside the appropriate hierarchical order, to be the one to have this authority. She's a woman. That's what we're saying. She's a woman. And over the centuries, the church has gone as far as to change her name in our Bibles so that we can present this person with authority as a man. You see how Paul is working to undo structures at the outset. Before even a word is spoken, Phoebe is undoing status quo. Most of our Bibles have corrected that. Like if you're looking for a different name for Phoebe in your Bible, that's mostly been corrected. That's happened historically. Anyway, the second piece is the history of this church, these churches. It's not one. Paul's writing to multiple churches with multiple figureheads from different classes and different places in society, including a clash between Jewish Christians and Greek Christians. So we've done this several times, so I'm not going to go extensively into this, but this is part of the makeup of what's happening in this letter, is that he's writing to churches that have a bit of competition going. See, what happens is, as the church develops, it is Jewish followers of Jesus that begin creating churches and that have the authority to speak and leadership in these churches. But a few years before this letter is written, the emperor sends off all of the Jewish Christians in the community, or at least a large portion of them, enough that it's noted outside even of our biblical storyline. So we have historians that note the expelling of, it's written as Jews on account of Christus, which we make connecting points and go, Jewish Christians that are causing problems are expelled from the city. And only a few years ago, at the time of this writing, Nero in charge allows them to return. And so while they are gone, Greek Christians take up the mantle of leadership in these churches. And there is now conflict over who has the authority to lead these churches. They now have the leadership roles. They now have with them also the social hierarchy of their community, in which they have more honor and more power and more control. And the Jewish Christians are arguing in return, no, we have the law, the Torah, and our history as the chosen people of God. That's why we should have power and leadership in this church. So do you see our conflict? Are we there? Make sense? This is the context in which Paul writes this church, these churches. And you can read through, we did this at the beginning, you can read through chapter 16, and you can see him name different leaders of different churches. And we know, we need help getting that information, but we know Jewish names and we know Greek names. We even know Greek names that are typically slave names. And so we see like this socioeconomic status that occurs throughout this storyline as well. In addition, most Jewish Christians would have zero heritage or zero honor in this system, as they are not citizens of Rome, and so they would not have the social status that some of these have. And so there's a socioeconomic element to all of these conversations as well. That's our playing field. That's where Paul starts his process. Lastly, he's writing specifically to say, I am coming to see you, and I've been trying to for so long. But I'm coming so that, one, I can preach to you, and two, that you can fund my visit into Spain so that I can preach to others. So there's an element of this letter that is a bit like a fundraising campaign. And so while he writes some very direct and some very bold language throughout Romans, it doesn't have the same boldness as, say, the Corinthians, where he has a relationship with these churches. He's writing both to encourage, but also to claim his own authority in this so that they will support him going to Spain. There's a lot going on. All that to say, I want us to think about this morning, as we think about the close of this, is what the overarching work that he's trying to do. So we typically take Romans, and we've done this a few times too, we typically take Romans and we talk about the theology, the doctrine that he is writing about, that he's creating in this process. And so we talk about the Roman road to salvation. We talk about using this as for all time to understand how we're supposed to be saved and what it means to be a follower of Jesus. That is not Paul's purpose. If you want to draw that out of it, go for it. But recognize that that's not why Paul is writing, which I think is important because we've read it as if that's the purpose of this letter. But he has all of these other things at play that we need to identify in the process. And secondly, he's writing something that has much more depth than a mental game plan for salvation, or even a mental game plan to find faith and discover what faith is supposed to be. What Paul is ultimately writing about is understanding how our faith works within the context of the community that we are living. So if his starting place is looking at churches in division, his ultimate purpose in identifying that division is to take that and to create a place where we can find unity, where we can be inclusive of the other, both socioeconomically, ethnically, in terms of the honor-shame system of the Roman world. All of that is within Paul's purview as he writes to help them identify what it means to be faithful Christians. It is, what does it mean to live out your faith in community? That is hook, line, and sinker what Paul wants to do. So if part of his purpose is to break down the system that he's looking at, one of honor and shame, one of competition over who has authority and who doesn't, he then begins writing, first, let me show you how all of this is broken. Second, let me show you how we begin rebuilding it through the vision that came through the gospel of Jesus. And finally, let me show you how that gets worked out when we live it out in community. That's his game plan. Break it down, rebuild it. How do we live this out? And they don't get separated. You can't separate one for the other for Paul. So I want to look at one specific piece as we look at his overarching theme throughout. This is his, as it's titled in my Bible, Prayer of Thanksgiving in Romans chapter 1, verses 8 and following. Remember, he doesn't know most of these people. And so as he's writing, he's trying to identify and connect. He says, first, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for all of you, because your faith is proclaimed throughout the world. For God, whom I serve with my spirit by announcing the gospel of his Son, is my witness that without ceasing I remember you always in my prayers. asking that by God's will I may somehow at last succeed in coming to you. For I am longing to see you, so that I may share with you some spiritual gift to strengthen you, or rather, that we may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith, both yours and mine. I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that I have often intended to come to you, but thus far have been prevented, in order that I may reap some harvest among you, as I have among the rest of the Gentiles. I am a debtor, both to Greeks and to barbarians, both to the wise and to the foolish. Hence, my eagerness to proclaim the gospel to you also who are in Rome. In those 7 verses, Paul identifies some significant pieces that he's going to let play out through the rest of the scripture, through the rest of his letter. He says, first, I long to see you so that I may share with you some spiritual gift to strengthen you, so that we may be mutually encouraged. He sets a stage in this letter to place all of us on common ground. He sets the stage here to identify that the working out of faith and our theology happens not in the context of one exerting power over another, but in the context that we are able to mutually support one another. That doesn't happen in a hierarchical system. It cannot happen in a system that one member is valued over another. And to drive his point home, as this is the starting place of his letter, he writes, I am a debtor. I am indebted both to Greeks and to barbarians, both to the wise and to the foolish. In the Greco-Roman world, honor is the name of the game. And at the top of everything is the Greek worldview. It comes with culture. It comes with class. It comes with beauty. It comes with an understanding in the world that is above every other understanding in the world. To say, I want to go visit Spain, where the barbarians are, is to claim that this gospel is of value not just to the ones with privilege in the Greco-Roman world, but also to the ones seen as wholly other. The furthest context that we can name, this is who we're talking about when he says the barbarians. And he doesn't just say we need to take this news to them. He says, actually, I'm indebted to them. In a system of honor and shame, you only are indebted to those with more honor than you. And he writes to them, I am indebted to this group of people that you think have and deserve nothing. I'm indebted to them. Sometimes we think about this in the West as taking... Okay, sometimes we think about this from my context as Americans, as taking democracy and the best worldview that the world has ever seen to the rest of the world. And we You can go back and look at all of our different military campaigns, the U.S., and watch the motivations behind the reasoning. And it comes with the superiority of who we are, the culture and knowledge that we have, that we get to exert and bring to the rest of the world. In a lot of ways, the worldview of those in the U.S., and we're not far from that, let's just be honest here, in the West, and the worldview of the Greco-Roman world is not all that different. When they went on military campaigns, they were bringing blessings to those worlds that they visited and conquered and oppressed. But it wasn't a bad thing. It was positive because they're bringing culture and honor and class with them. They're bringing peace of the Roman system to these other cultures and places. And so the barbarians here are the ones that Rome is visiting and conquering and bringing culture to through the Greek Hellenistic system. And Paul writes, I am a debtor both to the Greeks and to the barbarian. These are opposite ends of the spectrum. To the wise and to the foolish. Opposite ends of the spectrum. When we're out working in our community with those that live on the streets, there's a word that I've always found interesting that gets thrown around sometimes. And for me, it simply means someone who's silly or someone who's a fool. The word is goof. And it's like, it is 4 letters, but it's like the most hateful 4-letter word that you can call someone on the street. And that probably makes no sense to most of us in here. But you see it hurled at someone, and you see the visceral reaction when the word is used, and you understand, oh, it's not just something silly, this is sort of the most hateful insult that someone can muster in this moment. That would have been the word of fool here. So when he writes, I'm indebted both to the wise and the foolish, he is in the same way relating this to the most hateful insult of somebody who has no honor and no shame. No honor, plenty of shame, but not even the awareness of their shame. That is the barbarians. Paul's opening words in this letter is to begin to identify that the starkest contrasts in our culture and in our society are actually able to be brought together when we share and follow the gospel of Jesus. One that takes shame and turns it upside down. And that's what he's going to do throughout the rest of his letter. Is say, we begin this by talking about the ends of the spectrum and bringing them to the center. And we follow that through by telling the story of Jesus who worked to do the same thing. And that plays out in a lived theology by creating community and churches and life where the hierarchical system of honor and shame is thrown out the door. That's what Paul is doing throughout. And while he starts here, and this is not his thesis, this is not his like one-liner for his letter, it encapsulates what he's doing as he's speaking to these two different groups in Rome. You're claiming honor, you're claiming honor. In the gospel of Jesus that I'm trying to give to you or bring wholeness in is to remove the entire system of honor and shame. It is to put us on the same playing field where there is no slave or free, Jew or Greek, or male or female. When we are able to put that away, we are able to live in community. That's his driving point. From beginning to end. He moves from chapters 1 to 4, breaking things down, breaking down this system, and into 5 to 8 to building up this system, through 9 to 12, where he identifies what this looks like in a lived theology in our community, and closes it out looking at those churches and how they're working together in the midst of this conversation. Step 1, break it down. Undo the parts that have created hierarchy, that have created shame. Rebuild it with the story of Jesus that throws shame out the window and identifies shame as our value in Jesus. And finally, live that in a way that happens in community. And he's writing to churches. But I think ultimately, like when we look at chapter 8, and he broadens community, and he broadens salvation, and he broadens restoration to include not just this small church, not just all of our churches, not just our community of Maple Ridge alone, but all of the earth and all of the cosmos being brought into this restorative process. And you don't have one without the other. You can't talk internally about breaking down the system and not address externally the barbarians that we're going to still treat as outsiders. We can't fix our community internally without recognizing that even our own honor does not produce something that we have superiority over when we walk outside of these doors. So we've watched that process happen over centuries in our churches as we begin to claim superiority over our neighbors outside the church walls. But Paul has sent the entire system of superiority, of hierarchy, of honor and shame out the window. Good luck with that. Should we close with a song? A prayer? God, we're thankful to be with you, to open up text, to open up the letters of the early church, and to identify the ways in which the entire system and structures and social imaginations were being upended. The ways in which the story of Jesus was not simply individualistic, but was carried out in community. That restoration happens not alone by ourselves in our heads, but happens in the context of community, in the context of the rest of creation. Help us to live that out both here within the walls of our church and also as we head out into our various communities across the Lower Mainland. That we can, in small ways and in big ways, undo the role of superiority in our world. I pray all this in your Son's name. Amen. Thanks for listening to this sermon podcast from Open Door Church. Our intro and outro music was created by Lee Rosevere and is used under a Creative Commons by attribution license. Have a great week. Ask the hard questions and explore God's love. Everyone is always welcome to join the journey with us at Open Door. Learn more at opendoorfamily.ca. That's opendoorfamily.ca.